Democracy is at stake.
We are defending this nation.
When the Republic requires action.
Patriots defend our Constitution against attacks.
When the American Union calls for defense.
We are the Patriots.
We stand up and speak out for what's right. This is the Dean Obeidallah Show on SiriusXM Progress.
And welcome back, Dean Obeidallah Show. We're live right here, Wednesday, April 3rd. People on hold, stick around on hold. I'm going to get to you. I want to take more calls. We're talking about a very important issue. But right now, I hope she can hear me. I can see her right now. Excellent. Very happy to have on the show Anne Christine Dedesky, an investigative journalist, author of various books, documentary filmmaker, and the founder of Stop the Coup 2025, all about Project 2025. Anne, nice to meet you. Thanks for being on.
Thank you so much. I go by Anne Christine, or AC.
What do you prefer? Do you prefer AC or Anne
prefer
Christine?
Anne Christine, if you don't mind the long name.
Sure. No problem. You got it. So, and I know you were on Michelangelo Signorelli's show, and
Yes.
people raved about you. This is, I was looking at the website, Stop the Coup 2025. It's remarkable, the detail. You go through summary of each of the different chapters and what's going on. So I want to go break it down. But you're the founder of Stop the Coup 2025. How did you start it? Why did you start it? What's your mission?
Well, I am a longtime journalist, and but I have, sort of come what people would call an advocacy journalist, in the sense that when you work on some issues, you're automatically considered an advocacy journalist. But I'm really an old school investigative journalist. And I was starting to report last year on some of the issues around criminalization of LGBTQIA in Uganda and stuff, because I've done a lot of work in Africa. And my background is I've done a ton of work in Haiti. I used to report for the Village Voice and the Nation and those things in the 90s. And at the time I came across, as I was doing this, I did a big meeting that I organized at the UN for the General Assembly, because I felt like governments really needed to speak out on what was happening, particularly because our foreign policy, our U.S. foreign policy, really supports a set of civil rights. And so this kind of criminalization was really counter to what we say that we stand for in our foreign aid, our foreign policy, et cetera, and our domestic policy. So, at the time, I was really struck because I read this thing and I just thought, wait, did I miss something? It's this huge policy document. And I was like, is this for real? So I had actually done some reporting in the 90s, which is really when the Conservative Coalition began, and Ralph Reed and Falwell and all those folks. And I had been tracking a little bit of the very early American Nazi rise in that time. But since then, I hadn't looked at it too much. What I was interested in is the fact that there were some American NGOs on the right that have been deemed hate groups by the Southern Poverty Law Center. And these were the ones who were behind this exportation of the criminalization of LGBTQ issues abroad. So I began to see the connections, and I saw that those folks are also involved in this circle. So I reached out to some journalists who were colleagues and said, hey, how does this look to you? This looks really serious, including Mike. And he's like, yeah, I've kind of looked at this. And I was like, Mike, this is for real. You have to look at this. So that's what we started, and basically said, look, you start getting the word out. And I pulled together people in my circle who are a lot of activists and people working across intersectional issues, some journalists. And honestly, none of them had heard of Project 2025, and they certainly hadn't read it. And when they did, they just couldn't believe it. I mean, people who are journalists are like, okay, this is them kind of doing what we thought that they said they were going to do for a long time. So let me just break this down for you. The reason why I think we're seeing Project 2025, and we saw it in 2022, there's two real reasons. One is primarily because of the gains that we saw in these different sectors: racial equality gains, feminist gains, women's rights gains, LGBTQ, etc. And then also in 2022, I think some of your listeners will probably be familiar with a character, as I call him, a GOP lawyer and a big player in the conservative movement named Leonard Leo. I know that they also know about Charles Koch. Well, in 2022, Leonard Leo got his hands on about $1.6 billion from a Chicago industrialist named Barry Sade. And he really was given carte blanche to use that money to weaponize, essentially, the conservative movement in some ways. And what he did was he put it into Project 2025. So I recently published a piece on our website, which really shows that there's about 100 conservative groups that have come together now. Initially, it was 75. Now it's 100 behind Project 2025, which is a vision document, right? It's a presidential transition vision document. What's different from it compared to all other prior ones is that in many ways, these people who have in the last couple of years really come together, initially under Donald Trump, but also really within the Christian nationalist kind of movement, have consolidated their vision. And with this money, they have put it behind certain policy goals, a lot of different court cases, and they have the means to really put in place this big vision. So it has the imprimatur of the Heritage Foundation, but the people who wrote this, arguably people are going to argue how long it is. We say it's 877 because when you get the document, it's 877. Some people say 920. Bottom line, it's so big, it's so hard, it's almost impossible for people to get their hands around it. And what is it? It's a document that is unbelievable in its goals. It seeks to dismantle the administrative state, what we would call the federal government. But really what it does is something never seen in the United States. It seeks to put in place essentially what they're calling now their kind of government in waiting. Through means that are untested, it seeks to give unprecedented supreme powers to the executive branch, meaning the next GOP president. It seeks to remove, through this mechanism called Schedule F, if it works, it's a kind of executive order, remove, they say 50,000 in their document, but we've actually seen what they were actually trying in 2020. And we realize it's going to be tens of thousands of federal workers who have nothing to do with policy positions. And they vacate those positions so they can automatically be removed, lose their pensions. And they put in their place recruited loyalists who are put into what we call acting positions. In other words, they're allowed to be there until some of them get maybe Senate approval or have to be vetted. But the way that they're doing it is kind of weaponizing these tools of administration. And so it really is what we call a coup. It's a soft coup. And if it succeeds, it would give this consolidation of power and restructuring of the levers of government and authority in put it into the hands of a president with a pretty small group of his cronies, or his or her, but right now it's a his candidate.
Right. And it is remarkable that they go through issue after issue, and then on your website you document issue after issue what their real goals are. So I want to ask you about some of the specific issues so people understand.
Yeah.
Let's start one with LGBTQI rights and what this would do. What does Project 2025 call for in terms of this community?
Well, I think the LGBTQ community and immigrants, what I really point to is that Project 2025 is a kind of an autocratic tool blueprint. It seeks to polarize the society and build votes for the conservative side. So it's using both immigrants in this way where it's demonizing. For LGBTQIA communities, it seeks to remove LGBTQIA identity from all federal rules and regulations, meaning all the protections are gone. So that means going after gay marriage, it goes after gay adoption, it goes gays in the military, etc. It also seeks to criminalize transgender and non-binary identity, any identity. It says that sex is only a binary, there's only two genders, there's no possibility. And it criminalizes where it equates transgender or non-binary identity or gender fluidity on the par with pornography, which is a crime. So both to be a crime. So you're getting a criminalization. Not only that, but anyone who is seen as supporting or providing services, for example, gender-affirming care or surgeries to transgender people who are being treated for dysphoria, or LGBTQ, for example, librarians, or school board people, teachers who seek to, present or show the LGBTQIA history or experience in a book. These people could be criminalized. It calls for criminalizing, arresting, putting people in jail. So you're seeing that. The reason I say autocracy, it's really important for us to understand the goals of it. What is the goal of it? You're making people afraid of a group of people. You're making their identity a threat to others. And if you seek to support them, you become a criminal. And we have seen this. This is kind of the classic imprint we're seeing in other countries. And the reason I, brought up this issue around Uganda, which we saw today, the verdict on Uganda, this is what they're doing. They're criminalizing, and they're also going for a broader criminalization of the society. And it's not by accident. Part of the model for the LGBTQIA and the immigrant are taken almost as a template from the Orban regime in Hungary. What they did was they put in place a series of undemocratic actions and moves, and they basically were successful in, using immigration in particular domestically and using the LGBTQIA also to really polarize and kind of cement some of their support from arch conservatives, particularly in Hungary, it was Catholics. And so in 2022, when Berisha gave all this money to Leonard Leo, you also saw a number of U.S. conservatives head over to Hungary to study this with the Orban regime. And the Orban regime helped them figure out what they might do. And they came back and they wrote Project 2025. And you may know that very recently, the Heritage Foundation actually signed a contract with the Orban administration to help them with Project 2025. That was very recent. So
that's remarkable.
We also see Hungary, for example, literally, and I'm sure you probably covered some of that, supporting some of the anti-LGBTQIA and the anti-critical race theory also. They give money, the government gave money to people like the Claremont Institute's Chris Rufo and others who were the architects of this very demonizing, rhetoric, but also the actual cases, the arguments, the legal arguments. And so we're seeing that this is not just something that, the Heritage Foundation kind of came up with. It's really taking the tools that are working, that other right-wing populists have used, and seeing how it can be applied in the United States. The other piece I want to talk about is the Christian nationalism that is at the root of this. Mm-hmm. This is a template for authoritarianism. It's also a template for Christian theocracy, meaning there is a desire to align all U.S. domestic and foreign policy on what they call, quote unquote, pro-family. It's an anti-choice, anti-diversity, anti-gender, right? It also, of course, is completely anti-climate and these other issues. But the goal is to put in place, essentially, policy that not only elevates Christianity and Christian doctrine, but also supplants secular law, and certainly in areas of education. And that is really where we see the slide toward Christian theocracy.
Certainly. And one of the other elements of Project 2025 is attacking abortion access. Specifically, they want to ban the abortion pill. And I saw that they also want to demand enforcement of the Comstock Act, which was debated, touched on slightly in the Supreme Court oral argument last week. But I'm so glad you brought up the Christian nationalist bent, and that's the fuel to this, so people understand in the big picture what's happening. It's not a happenstance. There's a bigger picture here. So what else about abortion access? Ultimately, would their goal be complete banning of abortion, just like they're doing in 14 states right now?
Yes, they're very open about the fact that actually they seek a federal ban on abortion. And I think it's even further than that. Although there's different authors. So as I mentioned, there's 30 authors that cover the 30 departments of government in this particular vision transition document, which is a transition for a new administration, right? And so many of the authors are former number 1 and 2 position Trump officials. Others are Christian leaders, maybe in that particular area of Department of Government. And they do state that, they would if they could ban, birth control. It goes as far as birth control. It's not just mifepristone. It's going after birth control. It's really a kind of complete control of women's bodies. And it's in tandem with, and our project looks at it kind of through the lens of really, this Christian nationalism is also very, we would call it patriarchal in the sense that what is a patriarchy? It's male control or male power over women's bodies. I mean, obviously it can affect men too, because many men are pro-abortion or also have decisions in terms of their families and, family planning. But the fact that it's going after birth control, you're really looking at it. It's also in part a vision of supporting what they call the acceptable family. It's the natural family. To them, the only acceptable family is married couples, right? First of all, so forget divorce. They would like to get rid of divorce. Going to just break it to all your listeners there. If you're divorced,
That's the end of divorce. You're stuck forever, folks.
You're in the headlights too. And they also want to, give certain breaks, like tax breaks to married people, tax breaks to couples to have children, things like that. Again, these are a lot also what we see. We've seen it in the Hungary model. We've seen it in Poland, some other places where, and when you really scratch the surface, the other agenda that's so important to talk about here is really a white supremacy agenda. Project 2025 is an incredibly racist document. When you really begin to break it down and look at it, we can talk about some of the other attacks, like the rollback of DEI, the rollback of racial equality, cutting funding to the HBCUs, all these kinds of things. But underneath it, part of it is, I think, this thing that you probably have heard about, which is kind of this fear, the great replacement theory it's called. It's a fear of white people and white people in power of losing their social standing and their social power. And underneath this, when you see, who is impacted by cuts, for example, to Medicaid and Medicare and POOR and WIC and SNAP and all these cuts that they're calling for, or, what happens when you're cutting school meals at a public school, who's impacted? Well, we know who's impacted, people who are living in poverty, and that's not just people of color, but it is a lot of people of color. And when you look at education, what is it doing? I mean, look at the big picture here. We're talking about removing DEI and removing racial equality, which means you're no longer teaching about Black history or brown history. You're no longer discussing the possibility of cases of discrimination. You're removing civil rights agencies and offices, so there's no way to possibly litigate if someone is experiencing discrimination. And you kind of go down it, and what does it really spell? It's pushing forward a white supremacy agenda, fundamentally. And the Christian nationalist agenda is very much a white supremacist agenda. So it's not as individuals racist, it means what is the agenda really doing at a policy level? And I always say to people, the words are really important, but also look at what is the agenda under this. And we have a document that's very interesting to us. We put in a lot of documents about Project 2025. The one that's getting almost the most attention is a document saying it's a reader's guide to reading the propaganda of Project 2025 to understand the agenda that's really underneath this. It's the same agenda with immigration, right? It's about keeping brown and Black folks and others, foreign nationals, out and trying to increase the birth rate of whites and Christian whites and only making certain families acceptable and giving them greater entitlements. And
we've had some experts on Christian nationalism on the show who made the point that white supremacy and Christian nationalism are intertwined because it's the same people. It's the white Christian evangelicals who are the ones that fuel this, that are about this, and then, yes, they want white supremacy as well. So let's touch on.
But one thing here I want to say, Dean, it's very important for people to understand that Christian nationalism is not just a white movement. In fact, Latino evangelicals are the largest group, and that's one of the reasons why Heritage Foundation is actually most recently doing a lot to try to get their vote. And we see this in the swing states. They're reaching out to the right-wing media in Spanish. They're going to the churches. And so you'd say to yourself, how can people of color, whether they're religious evangelical, support an agenda that is essentially anti-people of color? Well, we've seen this in life before because maybe they have a greater affinity or they're being told a story around abortion, or maybe they're being sold pro-life. And that's true of immigration. I mean, I was talking yesterday to someone who said that they felt like a lot of the left messaging around Project 2020 is very tone deaf when it comes to what's happening in the South and the border, because they're assuming that people who are first generation or second generation immigrants, are against the idea of closing the border, and they're not. I mean, we've seen this Cuban Americans. I mean, you really need to pay attention to different constituencies. So I think it's very important that people understand that Christian nationalism is a movement. It's not a culture war. People tend to see this as a culture war. It's not a culture war. This is a political battle. These are political strategies. And seeking to get the vote of, racial minorities by appealing to their religious side and kind of playing down the side that is essentially, a kind of racist agenda or white supremacy agenda is part of it.
So how would Project 2025 address issues, you touched on it slightly, civil rights and diversity, equity, inclusion programs?
Well, as you think, it calls for cutting all DEI policies and agencies. It calls for removing the civil rights agencies and oversight in most of the departments, defunding. It's really very, very specific and very targeted. And I think that that's really where you see that it's not just a matter of saying, we're going to remove these policies that ask people to consider what the impact is of kind of historic or systemic racism or systemic inequity. but it's also removing the means to redress, right? So if an employee feels like they have been discriminated against on the ground of discrimination, they're going to lose their ability to be able to bring those cases in, because the offices that are normally charged with investigating. And not only that, but there's also things like data collection, the census. I mean, they're going after all these different bodies in order to say, we're no longer going to collect any data about racial aspects or racial characters. They go so far as to say that somebody who is raising the issue of race is themselves racist. And it's this remarkable kind of gaslighting that you see. And that's what we talk about in the propaganda document. It's really quite fascinating. And I know I shouldn't be fascinated, but I am, because it seems counterintuitive, right? It seems counterintuitive to say, but it is, it's consistent. And it's essentially, we see Trump himself as a candidate do this a lot, and he did it when he was president. We're kind of taking something that he's being accused with and basically accusing people of that, turning that around. And it's very effective in terms of a rhetorical strategy. So gaslighting, is really at the heart of the rhetoric of this document.
Well, I just saw something today about Donald Trump's going to be talking more about discrimination against white people, which he already did, but I guess they're going to talk about it more on the campaign trail. But polling shows of MAGA supporters that they believe discrimination against white people is just as big of a problem, if not bigger, than discrimination against black people. So this white victimhood that runs underneath MAGA, it's all wrapped up together. Like, as you see these things.
Right.
And then,
again, it's the great replacement theory. It's it's telling people you are hurting and you are not getting what you need because of these other people, because of this other thing. It's classic kind of autocratic divide and conquer campaigns. And the polarization that we've seen is intentional. They talk about it. They do focus groups. They find out which issues are more likely to really kind of raise the ire of their base constituencies. And then they work those messages.
As we hear Donald Trump all the time repeat, about immigrants, they're animals, and people go, why would you say that? Well, that had a test somewhere in some focus group somewhere. That's the thing. Say it. Our base. You're
normalizing violence. And he is again, but also Project 25. It's a normalization. When you begin to vilify people and you deem them in your policies or in your programs or your rules as less worthy of the same civil rights as other people, you make them a group to be feared, you drive them underground, then you're also raising the violence by demonizing them so that other people see them as a threat and feel like they are worthy to be, to have violence against them, whether it's criminalization, whether it's beating them, whatever. And this is what we see. And so we're seeing it because it's preparing the American populace, particularly that base, for the acceptability of violence as a response. And we're seeing this. This is very much what happened under Orban. We're seeing it in a lot of regimes. They're doing it now. And we're seeing that, yes, that the Trump campaign is also doing it. We are very clear about saying this is not about Trump, though. This is really the conservative movement. And it would be wrong to think that this is Trump. They see that candidate is willing to, carry out their plan. But so was, Ron DeSantis, probably so were any of the others who were beginning to make noise about the agenda of Project 2025.
Yeah, and when I saw other articles about Project 2025, and maybe from your website or others talking about that the coalition of groups involved with this are those who led attacks on reproductive rights, on bodily autonomy, on gender studies, equal rights, and the Me Too initiative, and more. And that's what we're dealing with. So another issue, climate change, it really jumped out at me how their hostility, I know their hostility for years, but it almost seemed to get slightly dampened in that as things were changing and we couldn't deny the weather. But what would Project 2025 do in terms of programs and policies that address climate change?
Well, we just put up a climate change paper this week, actually. So it calls for, you probably wouldn't be surprised, a day one. A lot of this is day one. They have a plan. They have a 180 playbook. They go in, they have executive orders. So on day one, it would freeze all the Biden climate change policies. It would repeal everything that is currently in existence. And I think that when you're asking why, one reason is actually in a lot of this whole plan that people tend to miss is the economic plan. It's a plan that favors large corporations, and it removes the regulations that they consider to be onerous for doing business. And that's true of climate change, too. So whether you're in an industrial sector, whether you're in a trade sector, or in an agricultural sector. So it's really playing to profit. Profit is very much a motive, and big corporate profit. And that's really actually where they get their support. So even though their social policies may not be what, big business likes so much, they're looking at their bottom line and saying, well, we're going to make a lot more money, so let's support this agenda. And that's really where we're seeing with the climate. It's unbelievably, sweeping. The other thing is it's not surprising, but it's also a real attack on science. So it attacks everything to do with science. So that's not just, the agencies like the CDC and the FDA and things like that, but also abroad. It questions the authority and the legitimacy of apolitical, neutral scientific bodies, whether it's in the area of air or soil or food safety, whether it's in the international sphere, it's WHO. All the regulatory agencies are basically saying we're not going to acknowledge your authority. And this, I think, is again a piece of why it's important for people to understand autocracy. I talk about autocracy to understand that's really the agenda here, because what autocracy does is it not only seeks to put in place and solidify the power of a president and a core of people, it questions and delegitimizes the government itself and the institutions itself, as well as the institutions of the press. And that goes in hand. So a big part of what Project 2025 does is it not only wants to deconstruct and dismantle and entirely eliminate, departments of the government, whether it's public education, whether it's the FCC, but it also invites the private sector, and it seeks to give an unprecedented role to private sector groups who, after all, are not elected and are not necessarily trained for these positions. It seeks to give them positions that are the federal government's responsibility and authority. So it transfer that responsibility and authority to a private sector group, and it not only would have them in as advisors, it would give them decision making. So look at this. I mean, this is corruption at a fundamental level, right? So we're talking about, I think that there was, I don't know who would the quote, we used a quote in one of our papers looking at the Labor Department, where we're talking about the politicization of government in a level that we've never seen. It's really putting in place a loyalist group of people and changing the rules so that they can really consolidate it, sidelining Congress, sidelining the courts, but also then inviting in corporations and private sector who are not accountable as government agencies. They're not required to go through the same hoops and, and things to be reporting to the American people. And so that's where you see the fullness of the corruption and also the possibility of influence, the political influence, et cetera. Yeah.
The transformative nature of what they want to do. It's their dream document. And with someone like Trump would do whatever they want, because one of the promises is loyalty. And that's what it would deliver. And that's what one of Trump's, above everything almost, is the idea of loyalty.
Yeah, I mean, people have to take loyalty tests for this. I mean, if you want to stay in a job and they come in and they want to change your job, you have to agree. You'll have to sign a paper saying we'll agree to go with this policy change, even if it's illegal. I mean, they're expecting that a lot of what they're going to do is going to get pushed back. That's why they're recruiting 20,000 loyalists, right? Putting them through an administrative camp, a course, so that they're ready on day one, giving them little teams of advisors to counsel them once they get in their acting positions. But they're also bringing in 5,000 lawyers, and they're giving new power to the Office of General Counsel. They expect pushback. This is a policy and a legal strategy, right? This is a legal coup. And they're going to seek to make it legal even if it is illegal. In other words, it's going to challenge a lot of law. It's untested. But I'd also love to talk about, what people can do, because that's really what comes up a lot. Right,
that's what I want to get that. But right before that, though, what is their vision under Project 2025 of democracy and elections going forward?
Yeah. Well, of course, that they are doing a lot in terms of gerrymandering here, support for gerrymandering. If you look at the money where it's going, we did a document. It's called, I think it's called Follow the Money. And it lays out and gives you information about, I think, 75 of the original advisory groups, the conservative groups that are backing Project 2025, all of whom indirectly or directly got money from Leonard Leo in 2022. And you can see a number of them are the ones who are advancing these attacks on the courts at the state level. They're advancing the legal arguments of certain cases in Fifth Circuit, trying to get it up to the Supreme Court. It's kind of all of a package. So it's very much seeking to restrict the rights of Black and brown folks, questioning it, and also then, of course, advancing this redistricting to try to be able to get more Republican votes in particular. So it's, that's not anything that's unusual. We've seen that many over the years. I think the difference is the amount of money they've got to do it, and the fact that the courts, in many ways, certainly the Supreme Court, you have 5, arguably 6 of the Supreme Court justices who were put there by Leonard Leo and handpicked. And many of the people in the lower courts of Fifth Court are also people from the Federalist Society that have been handpicked and put in place. So this is a long game. I always say to people, look, it didn't come from anywhere. This is a long game that Leonard Leo and Christian conservatives have had. They got a big amount of money to do this. A lot of people have come on board because the money's there now, the agenda is there, and also the political will, I think, after January 6th shifted. And people suddenly saw, wow, we can really do things that we have never done before. We can do things that might be considered illegal. We're ready to do this. And this is why we consider it to be an administrative coup.
And we had on recently the head of End Citizens United and talked a lot about Leonard Leo. And we've had Senator Sheldon Whitehouse on. Talked about he's a big. I learned about Leonard Leo from Sheldon Whitehouse in Senate hearings, a few years ago. So let's talk about the stopping this, because you have StopThe Coup2025.org is your organization, the website organization, and it's remarkably detailed. So what can we do? What should we be doing?
Well, I guess it depends on first. The first thing I would say, everyone should try to clone themselves into 10 or 20 or 100 people and tell everyone they know about Project 2025 and go read about it. Decide it for yourself. It's such an equal opportunity attack that wherever you are, you'll look in your sector and you'll say, okay, that's how it affects me. Whether I'm, somebody's going to be retired or getting Social Security or whatever, my kid's in school, or I'm looking for a student loan, or, I'm a farmer and suddenly, I can't hire any of my workers because they're all going to be threatened, etc. So educate yourself. I say, don't take my word for it. Go read it. We've made it all visible for you. We got it all down in a little two pages bullets for you. That's number one. The second thing is that I think that people can look and see how is it already impacting them. Look at their community, whatever it is issue they care about, and see where that agenda may already be impacting them. There are a lot of victories that we have had that, tend to be overlooked when we see so much noise that's happening, that particularly in the campaigns and Trump, they get a lot of noise. But there are victories in every area. We actually know how to fight a lot of this, whether it's library bans, school boards, court legislation. So we are going to be in our website making a lot of those resources and strategies visible. But I think that people can look and see who in their community has been fighting back and talk to the key sectors and groups. So know who in your community is in a position to fight back. We think that it's critical that Congress and also people on the campaigns, the folks in the different parties, that they raise this issue of Project 2025 and they talk to voters. My feeling is vote for your conscience. We're not telling you to vote one candidate, vote for your conscience, but look and see how this affects you, because this is really an attack on all of us. This is our fundamental democracy, and we've never seen this before. So, you can say, well, maybe all these candidates seem kind of the same, and I hate them all, which, I probably hear every day from nearly everyone I know. That said, it's really critical to look at what has been done. So I think that's one. And then I think that in different sectors, for example, if you are someone who's a journalist, report on this. If you're in a think tank, what people have not done so far, this is a real gap, is while people are able, and we have certainly synthesized what this project and this blueprint is, there hasn't really been the analysis of what happens if it's carried out. What are the first targets going to go? What will be the impact to our communities if these things happen? And the reason is because we need to have a counter blueprint. We need to be able to say, at least between now and November, here are a few things that can be done, whether it's in the labor area, whether it's Schedule F, whether it's the OMB rules, et cetera. In every area, there are steps, particularly people in government. We're talking a lot to the unions right now about that, the federal unions, because, we're talking, they're talking about tens of thousands of their workers and all of their own jobs. I mean, they're going to get rid of all the federal unions. So this is serious. And then I think, that we have also lessons, both from our own movements and in other countries, about what you do in this moment. I'll give you two that I thought were really important from Hungary. In Hungary, they knew 2 years before Orban, but they didn't want to take it seriously, that he would win. And what they didn't do was prepare their Congress for the possibility of things that were laid out that he said he was going to do. We know what this plan is. What we have is a tool that also needs to be weaponized. They have told us what the attack plan is, which means we know what's coming and we can organize ourselves. And we have tons of allies in every sector, and we have a lot of tools. So to me, it's like, get the word out, get it to the people who are mobilizing other people. So we're working with allies to get the message to community organizers in different sectors, trying to get it to the media, really getting them to discuss it. I think once we tell people basically this is the attack, then they can really have the conversation about what's most important. What's going to be more important to Latino evangelicals may not be the same as, kids who are taking part in, the Gaza protests and who are just completely disenchanted and don't even want to vote at all. It's critical that we engage people. And I think the second piece for us is also we need to bring forward what is our counter blueprint, what is our vision for democracy. Today, for example, I had a conversation with somebody who is an administrative law specialist, a lawyer. And one of the things he talked about was that actually under Biden, there have been incredible achievements, but no one knows about them. So we have a lot of work to do to talk about
Sure.
Where and how does our government function? Where is our rule of law? Why do we care about this? Because we all actually deeply care. We take for granted our democracy. And going back to Hungary, what they found is that, their opposition stopped talking about rule of law and democracy and things like that. They were very caught up in identity politics and other things. And then when they lost their rights and suddenly they lost their ability to organize, to speak out, they lost their free press, they began to really have the conversations they should have been having before. So again, that's a lesson. So we have a lot of lessons. So I think our job as journalists and stuff is to bring forward the lessons, the field-tested strategies, and also to really bring those messages as civil society. When we see someone saying like, let's pass Schedule F, well, call your congressperson, take the action. There is a lot to do. There's a lot to do in every one of these sectors. People have made specific calls for action that could help to really mitigate potential harms of Project 2025.
It's great stuff. And again, the website, StopThe Coup2025.org. You can read more details about each of the chapters of Project 2025. Get involved. I know that you did a protest outside of the Heritage Foundation. I assume you'll be doing other things.
So it wasn't really a protest. It was just our launch rally with a bunch of allies. But
okay.
we did want to do it there. We felt like it was important, to do it there, to show, look, Heritage, we're not going to just, let you come and do such a massive attack on our democracy without saying that this isn't something that we accept. And really kind of letting them know that there is a mobilization taking place. I do want to say that in the last 2 months, we're starting to see much more, or certainly of the media. We still think the legacy media is not where they need to be. Right. We do feel that the media itself, is under attack. If you look at the agenda, we have a media document on that. They want to remove all the left of the dial radio, right? They want to make the FCC basically go away. They want to stop all the progressive, whether it's NPR, whether it's PBS. They want that to go. So it's really not just a silencing of media, it's a removal of access to a conversation, right? Possibly any dissent. And they also want to criminalize. They want to go after people. We've seen this, certainly journalists. We've seen the whole whistleblower. It's all in Project 2025. So the media has a major stake. We need an independent press. We need to investigate. And we have a lot of conversations right now that we should be having that we need in the major media.
Well, Anne Christine, thank you so much for being on. And it's remarkable work you're doing and laid it all out. And I look forward to chatting with you again because we got to talk in the fall again to alert people what's going on, to get engaged, to stop this and to motivate them. So thanks so much. Have a great night.
Thank you so much. And again, we welcome allies. Thanks so much.
Of course. Take care. So, folks, we'll take a break. We're going to come back and take more calls. 866-997-4748. Be right back after this.
Dean Obeidallah Show on SiriusXM Progress 127.